Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. You know how even if your eyes are closed and you're listening to a sound, you can tell what kind of a space it's occurring in. Maybe it's in a small, very reflective space or outside or some different kind of room. We can have the ability to localize sounds and gather information about the kind of space that it's occurring in because of early reflections. And early reflections are those first sort of bounces that happen off of the surfaces, the walls, the floors, the objects in the room, and then they come back to our ears. So we'll hear the direct sound from the source, but then we'll also hear what are called early reflections. And when you're mixing, these are a very, very powerful tool that you can make use of. They can situate your sounds within a space, but they also have the benefit of pushing the sound out of the speakers, or as I'll show you conversely, it can help sounds to set back and allow other sounds to maintain the foreground of the song that you're working on. So I want to show you how to use early reflections in your reverb effects. This reverb right here is a fairly commonly featured one, so your reverb might look a little bit different, but it will probably contain features like early reflections and the reverb section. Yours might be called diffusion or have a diffuse label on there. Diffusion and reverb are interchangeable. We're going to be focusing on the early reflections here. So in fact, I'm going to take the reverb all the way out, and your reverb again might not have the visualization of early reflections, but that's what these little lines represent. They represent each of the little bounces that are happening off of different parts of the surface. In this initial reverb type, it's a hall, so there will be bounces that happen pretty long bounces because some of the walls will be far away, and then they'll come back to you from there. Whereas a smaller space like a room, it won't have as many reflections right away, nor will it have many distant reflections. But if the room is fairly uniformly, it is fairly uniform in dimension, then a lot of the bounces will happen at similar times, and then they'll kind of all come back to you that way. But when we're working with early reflections, the size works together with the type of the room. So if you're working on a song, try to think about what kind of a space that it's occurring in. Is it occurring in a stadium or a concert hall or a crowded, hot basement show or a living room show? Different kinds of spaces sound different, and so you can kind of use early reflections to emulate those. Now, with this song here, it's fairly mellow, but it's kind of an emotional song as well, so you might want to experiment with different kinds of spaces and how they feel together with the vocal. And I'm going to turn the size all the way up just for comparison at first. So this would be a big hall, a different kind of hall. And already there, between the hall and the room, you can feel that the sense of the space changes. This feels much smaller than the big hall settings. And chambers are purpose-built reverb chambers. They're usually very reflective. They'll maybe have tiled walls. And what the studios would do is they would feed in through a loudspeaker the signal, and then also have some microphones in that room, and it would capture all of those beautiful reflections in there. So chambers usually aren't very big, but they're very reflective, whereas halls are very big, less reflective. And the church is sort of a little bit bigger, less reflective as well, because the walls will be farther away. You can see on these lines here that the early reflections are pretty long. It takes a while for the sound to get to the surface, whether it's the ceiling or the walls, and then to come back to your ears where you would be listening. And we're just going to stick with those settings for now. This plugin also has some variations, so you might have In your Reverb plugin, maybe it would be a shape parameter. So you could have a hall, but maybe the dimensions of the hall are a little bit different, which would result in different early reflections as well. You can hear how the sound just starts to change a little bit. That one's nice. So you've got the type of space that it might be occurring in, the dimensions of the space, and then you can also adjust the size of it. So if this chamber is as big as it can be at 100 here, if we make it smaller, then all the reflections start to crowd a lot closer because it's as if the walls would be coming in closer. I'll show you the difference way down at the bottom. And don't mind that fuzz, that's just the algorithm having to adjust the reverb to the size. Okay, so now let's put it together with the primary vocal. So here's the dry vocal, and when you bring in the early reflections, you'd want it to be sort of tucked underneath the program element. Here we're working with the vocal, so you would want it to be tucked beneath the vocal. When the vocal is higher or louder, you can hear that the early reflections come up, but we'd like it to be a little bit quieter than that. And now I'll show you how the difference this makes within the full song. So here it sounds pretty good, but it sounds as though it's in the speakers. But once we turn on the early reflections, it's going to push the sound out of the speakers. And I'll explain why that happens in a minute. Nice, right? And the reason why it helps to push the sound out of the speaker is simply because we're putting some sound behind it. If you were to just be listening to me, then you wouldn't necessarily have a sense of where I was or how near to you I was. But then once you put some space behind the program element, it's as if it pushes it forward. Even if it's just a little bit, it makes a really impactful difference on your mix. And you don't necessarily need to do it only on your vocals as well. Let's do it with drums, and it's really useful on drums when they're programmed. If you're just using samples, then they might sound quite dry, but if you were to add your reverb, and we'll do the same thing, we'll pull the reverb all the way out, push this up, pull the early reflections down. So here they are dry, and then with the reverb added in. Yeah, it makes them pop a bit more, and it makes it feel as though all of these different samples are occurring in the same space as part of the same drum kit. Let's bring in the full song again, and I'll turn this reverb on and off for you. Pretty cool, right? And if you want to get a better sense of how reverb fits into the full mixing process, then I want you to make use of the 5-day foundation that I designed for you. It'll go one step at a time, carrying you through EQ and compression. Of course, delay and reverb like this is really fun, but you want to get a sense of how all of these pieces fit together as well. So make use of that. It's at ediblemusic.com/5days. Now, in addition to using early reflections to make a track sound cohesive or to push it forward, you can also use it to set a program element back in the mix, where if I were to have the early reflections a little bit higher than the actual track itself, it would sound as though it's further back in the room. You would hear more of the room sound if I was further away from you than if I was right up close to you. So you can emulate that kind of movement around the space that you're working with as well. I'll show you that with the organ here. And same deal. Notice when I turn it on and off how it makes way for the vocal and allows the vocal to come forward more. Nice. And now you notice we haven't even used the reverb part of the reverb, the diffusion of the reverb, where beyond those initial taps that would happen, those bounces off of the surfaces or the walls within the space, then those sounds would dissipate and it would turn into the more kind of cloudy, reverberant sound. But if you want to get a sense of where the song is occurring in, then early reflections are the more crucial part of being able to do that. And you want to be able to do that with each of the program elements in your song, and it'll really start to give a sense of dimension to your mix, a kind of a 3D component to the mix, by pushing things forward and setting things back all at the same time. Try it out.